Good evening. We're reading chapter 10 of Treasure Island called The Voyage. Before I start the voyage, one thing that you're going to hear about, and you've heard it mentioned before, is the bosun's pipe. The bosun was one of the petty officers, one of the minor officers, lower rank on the ship, and he was the person who announced to the crew what they needed to do. And it was very important. The pipe was important because it could be heard in all weather. Now here I'm going to try and get you the pipe, if I can get back to where I was. I'll do it later. I had it, but I lost it. Maybe you can find it. All that night we were in a great bustle, getting things stowed in their place, and boatfuls of the squire's friends, Mr. Blandley and the like, coming off to wish him a good voyage and a safe return. When you went on a sailing voyage like that, in a small boat like that, you would be months and months on the sea. It might take 2 months to cross the Atlantic Ocean to get where you're going, and it would take as long to get back, plus the additional time, whatever other time was going. So you could be gone for 6 months or a year on a voyage like this. We never had a night at the Admiral Benbow when I had half the work, and I was dog-tired when a little before dawn the bosun sounded his pipe, and the crew began to man the capstan bars. I might have been twice as weary, yet I would not have left the deck. All was so new and interesting to me. The brief commands, the shrill note of the whistle, the men bustling to their places in the glimmer of the ship's lanterns. Don't forget, it's nighttime now. The capstan bars, they were manning the capstan bars. We'll hear about this in a minute. "Now, Barbecue, tip us a stave," cried one voice. "The old one," cried another. "Aye, aye, mates," said Long John, who was standing by with his crutch under his arm, and at once broke out in the air in words I knew so well. 15 men on the dead man's chest," and then the whole crew bore chorus. "Yo ho ho, and a bottle of rum." At the third ho, drove the bars before them with a will. Now, what were they doing? The capstan is a winch. It's a winch is a way, it's like a special kind of wheel, and it had bars coming out of it that you could push against. And the crew would get behind, each crew member would get behind a bar, and they would start pushing. They used the song, which is called a sea shanty or a chant, to time themselves. So they would all be pushing at the same time, and that way they would get the anchor to pull up. They had to pull up the anchor from the bottom of the bay. The ship was anchored. The anchor would weigh perhaps a couple of tons, very heavy, 2,000 kilograms. And in order to get it up, it took a lot of work. So that's what is going on now. Long John Silver, who can't work, he can't do the pushing because he only has one leg, can sing the song and help them time themselves so that they all work together. Even at that exciting moment, it carried me back to the old Admiral Benbow in a second. And I seemed to hear the voice of the captain piping in the chorus. That's the old Captain Bill, the one who was hanging out at the Admiral Benbow for so long until he had his stroke and died. But soon the anchor was short up. That means they were starting to bring it up. The ship was right over the anchor. Soon it was hanging, dripping at the bows. The bow is the front of the ship. Soon the sails began to draw. That means the wind was filling the sails, and the ship was starting to move, and the land and shipping to fly by on either side. And before I could lie down to snatch an hour of slumber, The Hispaniola had begun her voyage to the Isle of Treasure. That's Treasure Island. I'm not going to relate that voyage in detail. It was fairly prosperous. The ship proved to be a good ship, the crew were capable seamen, and the captain thoroughly understood his business. But before we came the length of Treasure Island, 2 or 3 things had happened which require to be known. Mr. Arrow, he was the first mate, the officer just below the captain in rank. Mr. Arrow, first of all, turned out even worse than the captain had feared. He had no command among the men. That meant the men, he had no authority, they didn't listen to him, and people did what they pleased with him. But that was by no means the worst of it, for after a day or 2 at sea, he began to appear on deck with hazy eye, red cheeks, stuttering tongue, and other marks of drunkenness. In short, he was a shicker. Time after time, he was ordered below us in disgrace. Sometimes he fell and cut himself. He was so drunk. Sometimes he lay all day long in his little bunk at one side of the companion. Sometimes for a day or 2, he would be almost sober and attend to his work, at least passably. In the meantime, we could never make out where he got the drink. That was the ship's mystery. Watch him as we pleased, we could do nothing to solve it. And when we asked him to his face, he would only laugh if he were drunk, and if he were sober, deny solemnly that he ever tasted anything but water. I only drink water. I don't touch anything harder than water. He was not only useless as an officer and a bad influence amongst the men, but it was plain that at this rate he must soon kill himself outright. So nobody was much surprised, nor very sorry, when one dark night, with a head sea, he disappeared entirely and was seen no more. If you fell overboard at night, no one would see you fall overboard, and by the time anyone recognized that you were gone, the ship had moved on so far there was not a chance that you would be alive. Don't forget, we're in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. There's nothing out there but water, and the bottom is 2 miles down. Overboard, said the captain. Well, gentlemen, that saves the trouble of putting him in irons. Meaning, if he had continued with his drunken behavior, the captain would have been forced to confine him to the brig, put him in jail. But there we were, without a mate, and it was necessary, of course, to advance one of the men. One of the men had to become first mate. The boatswain, Job Anderson, was the likeliest man aboard, and though he kept his old title of boatswain, he served in a way as a mate. Mr. Trelawney had followed the sea, and his knowledge made him very useful, for he often took a watch himself in easy weather. And the coxswain, Israel Hands, was a careful, wily, old, experienced seaman who could be trusted at a pinch with almost anything. Now let me explain what a watch is. They would divide the time every day. There were 6 watches, each one 4 hours, and the men would work for a period of time, usually for 4 hours. Then they would have 4 hours off. Then they would have another 4 hours off, but they would work 2 or 3 of these 4-hour shifts a day, and they would have time to sleep. But somebody had to be there at night. Somebody had to be there during the day to take care of the ship, to man the sails, to steer, all the things that you have to do in order to get where you're going. He was a great confidant, that is Israel Hands, the coxswain. He was a great confidant of Long John Silver, and so the mention of his name leads me on to speak of our ship's cook, Barbecue, as the men called him. Why did they call him Barbecue? Because he was always barbecuing meat for dinner. Aboard ship, he carried his crutch by a lanyard around his neck to have both hands as free as possible. It was something to see him wedge the foot of the crutch against a bulkhead and propped against it, yielding to every movement of the ship, get on with his cooking like someone safe ashore. Still more strange was it to see him in the heaviest of weather cross the deck. He had a line or two rigged up to help him across the widest spaces. Long John's earrings, they were called. And he would hand himself from one place to another, now using the crutch, now trailing it alongside by the lanyard, as quickly as another man could walk. Yet some of the men who had sailed with him before expressed their pity to see him so reduced. And you'll see Long John was a very strong, very agile, and very able man. Even with missing one leg. A line is what they call a rope. A rope is a line. So they had a couple of ropes tied across various spaces that were too long for Long John Silver to get across by himself. Just so he had the rope to hold on to in heavy weather. Heavy weather means the sea was rough, the wind was blowing, the waves were crashing against the ship was rocking. Sometimes there'd be water pouring over the bow of the ship and running off down the deck of the ship. It could be pretty terrifying, but not for Long John. "He's no common man, Barbecue," said the coxswain to me. "He had good schooling in his young days and can speak like a book when so minded. And brave? A lion's nothing alongside of Long John. I seen him grapple 4 and knock their heads together, him unarmed." That is to say, 4 people who came up against him with arms, with swords or knives, and he could bang their heads together. He's that strong. All the crew respected and even obeyed him. He had a way of talking to each and doing everybody some particular service. To me, he was unweariedly kind and always glad to see me in the galley, which he kept as clean as a new pin. The dishes hanging up burnished, meaning polished, and his parrot in a cage in one corner. And don't forget, Long John had a parrot. "Come away, Hawkins," he would say. "Come and have a yarn with John." I'll tell you a story is what he meant. "Nobody more welcome than yourself, my son. Sit ye down and hear the news. Here's Captain Flint." I calls my parrot Captain Flint after the famous buccaneer. "Here's Captain Flint predicting success to our voyage. Wasn't you, Captain?" And the parrot would say with great rapidity, "Pieces of 8, pieces of 8, pieces of 8. Pieces of 8, those are Spanish coins. Money. Till you wondered that it was not out of breath, or till John threw his handkerchief over the cage, because when it got dark, the parrot would shut up. Now, that bird, he would say, is maybe 200 years old, Hawkins. They lives forever, mostly, and if anybody's seen more wickedness, it must be the devil himself. She sailed with England, the great Captain England, the pirate. She's been at Madagascar, and at Malabar, and Suriname, and Providence, and Portobello, and Long John is naming cities and places all around the globe. She was at the fishing up of the wrecked plate ships. Now, plate was silver. That was silver and gold. So when the ships were wrecked in storms, they would try to salvage the ships and get whatever they could out of the ship. It's there she learned pieces of 8, and little wonder. 350,000 of them, Hawkins. That's how many pieces of 8 went down with that ship. She was at the boarding of the Viceroy of the Indies out of Goa, she was. The Viceroy of the Indies is the name of a ship which was boarded by pirates and captured. Goa is off the coast, is in India, Hodu. and to look at her you would think she was a baby. But you smelt powder, didn't you, Captain? He means this parrot has been through fights, and the powder he's talking about is gunpowder. Stand by to go about, the parrot would scream. Ah, she's a handsome craft, she is, the cook would say, and give her sugar from his pocket, and then the bird would peck at the bars and swear straight on, passing belief for wickedness. There, John would add, you can't touch pitch and not be mucked, lad. Meaning, if you're around people who speak bad language, you're going to learn bad language. Here's this poor old innocent bird of mine swearing blue fire, and none the wiser, you may lay to that. She would swear the same in a manner of speaking before chaplain. And John would touch his forelock with a solemn way he had that made me think he was the best of men. In the meantime, Squire and Captain Smollett were still on pretty distant terms with one another. The squire made no bones about the matter. He despised the captain. He hated him. The captain, on his part, never spoke but when he was spoken to, and then sharp and short and dry, and not a word wasted. He didn't want to spend any more time with the squire, Trelawney, than he had to. He owned, when driven into a corner, that means he admitted, when driven into a corner, that he seemed to have been wrong about the crew, that some of them were as brisk as he wanted to see, and all had behaved fairly well. As for the ship, he had taken a downright fancy to her. She'll lie a point nearer the wind than a man has a right to expect of his own married wife, sir. But, he would add, all I say is we're not home again, and I don't like the cruise. The squire at this would turn away and march up and down the deck, chin in air. A trifle more of that, man, he would say, and I should explode. We had some heavy weather, which only proved the qualities of the Hispaniola. Every man on board seemed well content, and they must have been hard to please if they'd been otherwise. For it is my belief that there was never a ship's company so spoiled since Noah put to sea. And you know, that's a long time ago that Noah set sail in the Teva, in the ark, during the flood. Double grog was going on at the least excuse. Now, grog is a drink made out of water, rum, and lime juice. And sailors in those days were famous for drinking grog because of the lime juice. Because on long voyages, they had no fresh fruit and no fresh vegetables. And without that, they had no vitamin C. Without vitamin C, they would get a disease called scurvy, which was a terrible disease. So they were given a measure of grog every day with that lime juice because the lime juice has vitamin C, like orange juice. There was duff on odd days, that's some kind of pudding, as for instance, if the squire heard it was any man's birthday, and always a barrel of apples standing broached in the waist for anyone to help himself that had a fancy. Now, barrel of apples is what it sounds like. Broached means the barrel was open at the top. Never knew good come of it yet, the captain said to Dr. Livesey. Spoiled forecastle hands make devils. That's my belief. The captain of the ship, is not too happy with this. He thinks that they're spoiling the crew, and spoiling the crew will make devils out of them. They won't be, once the good times stop, they'll be mean and nasty. But good did come of the apple barrel, as you shall hear. For if it had not been for that, we should have had no note of warning and might all have perished by the hand of treachery. This was how it came about. We had run up the trades to get the wind of the island we were after. I'm not allowed to be more plain. And now we were running down for it with a bright lookout day and night. It was about the last day of our outward voyage, that means the voyage out from England, by the largest computation sometime that night, or at latest before noon of the morrow, we should sight the treasure island. We were heading south-southwest and had a steady breeze abeam, meaning behind us, and a quiet sea. The Hispaniola rolled steadily, dipping her bowsprit now and then with a whiff of spray. All was drawing alow and aloft. Everyone was in the bravest spirits because we were now so near an end of the first part of our adventure. Aloft means up in the mast, up in the rigging. Alow means down on decks. Everything was fine. Now, just after sundown, when all my work was over and I was on my way to my berth, it occurred to me that I should like an apple. I ran on deck. The watch was all forward, looking out for the island. The man at the helm, the steering wheel, was watching the luff of the sail, meaning watching how the sail was filling out and how well the ship was sailing and where, and whistling away gently to himself, and that was the only sound excepting the swish of the sea against the bows and around the side of the ship. In I got bodily into the apple barrel and found there was scarce an apple left. But sitting down there in the dark, what with the sound of the waters and the rocking movement of the ship, I had either fallen asleep or was on the point of doing so, when a heavy man sat down with rather a clash close by. The barrel shook as he leaned his shoulders against it, and I was just about to jump up when the man began to speak. It was Silver's voice, and before I had heard a dozen words, I would not have shown myself for all the world, but lay there trembling and listening in the extreme of fear and curiosity. For from these dozen words I understood that the lives of all the honest men aboard depended upon me alone. That's the end of this chapter. Chapter 11, What I Heard in the Apple Barrel, will come up next. Have a good evening.